the purple bread riots. On ration days, the city smelled like wet stone and warm hands. Nerio stood in the line of bakers and watched the granary doors breathe. The Annona storehouse was a long, low temple of brick and iron, its mouth a double set of doors banded in bronze. A row of lictors with bundled rods paced before it, their sandals making the same hard sound again and again, as if they were stamping a seal into the street. Behind Nerio, men argued in whispers about weight, about weevil, about whether the prefect was cutting the flour with chalk again. Ahead of him, a woman in a stained toga held a sleeping child against her shoulder and stared at the doors like they might open into a different season. The doors did not open. They exhaled. Incense drifted from somewhere inside, something sweet and purple-sour. Nerio's stomach answered with a hollow curl. He tightened his grip on his empty sack, the cloth worn thin at the corners from years of carrying grain that had become less and less grain and more something. A clerk finally appeared on the steps. He wore a white tunic and a wax tablet hung from his belt, and his mouth was purple to the lip line, as if he'd been drinking cheap wine. He raised a hand. "By decree of the Senate and the people," he called, voice practiced and flat, "the daily loaf will be distributed under the blessing of Concordia. Disorder is hunger, hunger is disorder. Receive and be at peace." The line shifted. A murmur ran through it, resentment dressed in obedience. Nerio heard his master's voice in his mind. "Keep your head down, boy. Keep your hands clean. Let the great men eat their metaphors. We eat what we can bake." The bronze bands on the doors rang as they swung inward. Inside was darkness and the smell of fungus. Clerks moved like pale fish in that dimness, counting sacks, stamping seals. Nerio stepped forward into the mouth and felt the air change, cool and wet, like the understreets near the baths. A sack landed in his arms with more weight than it should have had. The cloth was damp, a Senate seal, an owl, wings spread, pressed into purple wax. He carried it out, heart beating in the wrong place, and as he turned to go he felt something tickle his wrist. A leak, fine dust drifting from a seam. It glittered briefly in the light like ground glass, then vanished when it hit the air. He pinched the seam, closed with his thumb, and hurried away before a clerk noticed. The bakery sat on the ground floor of an insula that leaned into the street like an old drunk. Above it, families nested in rooms that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool. In the back, beyond the ovens, Nerio's mother slept with her mouth open, thin as paper on the pallet. His little sister, Juna, lay curled against her, small fist pressed into their mother's rib as if anchoring her to the world. Nerio set the sack on the work table and undid the knot. Purple flour. Not the natural pale of ground wheat, not even the grey of barley, but a bruised royal hue, as if someone had milled down the dusk. He plunged his hand in and felt it cling to his skin. It was finer than any flour he'd worked. It was also cold. His master Varro limped in from the front, wiping his hands on his apron. He had once been broad-shouldered. Famine had made him narrow. "You got it?" Varro asked. Nerio nodded, stamped and sealed. Varro sniffed the flour as if he could tell lies by scent. His eyes flicked to Nerio's fingers, already stained faintly purple. "Don't eat it raw. Don't even lick the air. We bake, we sell, we keep moving." "It smells wrong," Nerio said before he could stop himself. Varro's gaze sharpened. "Everything smells wrong. The fish smell like mud. The wine smells like vinegar. The priests smell like coin." He leaned close and lowered his voice. "We do not question the bread. The bread is what keeps the lictors from dragging people off by the hair. The bread is what keeps mobs from burning bakeries first." Nerio swallowed. It leaked. Varro stared at the sack seam, then at Nerio. For a long moment the ovens crackled in the silence like nervous laughter. "Patch it," Varro said, and turned away. Nerio stitched the seam with twine. When he pulled the knot tight, a few more glittering flecks floated up and caught the oven light. They were not purple. They were opalescent, white with a sheen of blue and green like the inside of a shell. He caught one on his fingertip. It felt like sand, but when he pressed it, it resisted, then gave with a soft snap. It left a smear like crushed pearl. A hum threaded through the air so low it could have been imagined. Nerio glanced at the oven mouth. Firelight pulsed. He told himself it was hunger. Hunger made the world sing sometimes. They worked through the night. Varro mixed the flour with water and salt, as always, but the dough did not behave as dough should. It rose too quickly, swelling with bubbles that shimmered purple-black. It tightened under Nerio's hands as if it were trying to hold its own shape. When they punched it down, it sighed. "Stop staring," Varro snapped once, though Nerio hadn't realized he was. The first loaves came out with a sheen on the crust like bruised plum. When Nerio broke one to test it, steam poured out smelling of incense and wet earth. He couldn't help it. He tore off a heel. The crumb was violet, threaded with darker veins. The first bite was sweet and bitter at once, like figs soaked in ash. It stuck to his teeth. It made his tongue numb. Then, the bakery vanished. Nerio was standing in the street outside, but the street was wrong. The stones were slick with rain, though the sky above was clear. The insulae leaned closer, taller, their windows black holes. Statues of senators lined the road, but their faces were not marble. They were pale masks, smooth and oval, with a seam down the middle like a cocoon. He turned and saw the forum in the distance, but it was a bowl, a mouth, an amphitheatre without sky. Seats rose in concentric rings made of ribs. The air was full of chanting that did not come from any throat. Disorder is hunger, hunger is disorder. His own heart was speaking the words, beating them against his ribs. Something moved in the corner of his vision. White shapes crawling along the edges of buildings. He blinked, and they were gone. He blinked again, and the bakery was back, heat smacking his face, Varro swearing as he hauled a tray from the oven. Nerio's hand was still holding the bitten heel. He stared at the bread like it had bitten him back. Varro saw his expression. "You ate it," he said, not a question. Nerio swallowed. His throat felt lined with velvet. "It tastes like prayers." Varro's face tightened. "Spit it out." Nerio tried. His mouth would not obey. The crumb had already melted into him, leaving only a purple smear at the corner of his lips. Varro grabbed him by the chin, turned his head under the oven light and swore again, softer. "Keep your mouth shut," Varro said. "If the prefect's men see that stain—" A knock hammered at the front door, not the polite tap of a customer. The hard, official thud of a fist that could summon rods. Varro and Nerio froze. Another knock. "Bakers!" a voice called. "Open! Inspection!" Varro's eyes met Nerio's. For a moment Nerio saw in them not just fear but calculation. Where to hide sacks, which lie to tell, what to sacrifice. Then the knocking stopped. Footsteps moved on. Varro let out a breath and shoved Nerio away. "Get the loaves to the stall now, before the line forms." Dawn in the city was a pale, sickly thing. The sun rose behind a smear of smoke from cooking fires and funeral pyres. Nerio carried baskets of purple loaves to the corner stall where they sold bread to those who could still pay. Even in famine, some coins moved. Already a small crowd waited. Thin men with hollow cheeks, women with sharp elbows, children with eyes too big for their skulls. They stared at the bread as if it were a relic. Nerio set the baskets down and forced his hands steady. The purple stain at his mouth felt like a brand. He kept his lips pressed tight. The first customer, an old man with a trembling jaw, paid with 2 chipped bronze coins. Nerio handed him a loaf. The man clutched it to his chest and whispered, "At last." He took a bite. His pupils expanded until his eyes were almost all black. He smiled, slow and strange. "I have always been seated," he said. Nerio frowned. "What?" The man's smile widened. "We have always been seated," he repeated, as if answering someone else. A woman behind him snatched her loaf and tore into it before Nerio could stop her. She chewed once, twice, then lifted her head like a dog catching a scent. "I have always been seated," she said. A boy bit his bread and giggled. "We have always been seated." The phrase spread through the line like a flame taking dry grass. People bit and spoke and bit again, mouths purple, eyes dark. The words came out in different voices, raspy, high, cracked, but the cadence was identical, as if they were all reading from the same tablet. Nerio's skin prickled. He heard the hum again, low under the city's morning noise. A man at the back of the crowd shoved forward, pushing others aside. His hair was matted with sweat. He grabbed Nerio's wrist. "Where is the rest?" he demanded. Nerio tried to pull free. "That's the whole loaf." The man's grip tightened until bone ground against bone. "No," he hissed. His mouth was already purple, though he hadn't eaten here. It's missing a piece. It's missing. His eyes rolled back briefly, showing white. When they snapped forward again, they fixed on Nerio with a clarity that felt like a knife. It's missing me. The crowd surged, drawn by something beyond hunger. Hands reached. Voices rose, not in anger yet, but in a single mounting note like a chant beginning. Varro shoved through from the bakery side, face pale. "Back," he barked. "Back, you dogs. You'll get your ration at the granary. This is for paying customers." The man holding Nerio laughed. "Paying?" he repeated, as if the word was foreign. "We have always been seated." Someone threw a stone. It struck the stall post and splintered wood. Then the crowd moved as one body. Nerio did not remember deciding to run. His feet were simply suddenly on the street, weaving between bodies, baskets spilling purple loaves behind him like offerings. He felt fingers brush his shirt. He heard Varro shout his name once, then the shout was drowned under a roar that sounded too coordinated to be a riot. At the corner he glanced back. Varro stood on the stall steps swinging a bread paddle like a club. A lictor's rod cracked down on his shoulder. Varro fell. Purple loaves scattered like bruised fruit. People scrambled over him without seeing him. Nerio's stomach clenched. He wanted to go back. Hunger and fear pulled him in opposite directions, stretching him thin. He turned and ran harder. He did not stop until the streets narrowed and the smells changed from bread and smoke to urine and cheap perfume. He ducked into an alley behind a shrine to a minor goddess with chipped eyes and pressed his back to the wall, panting. His hands were still purple. He had a sack slung over his shoulder. In his panic, he had grabbed the leaking flour sack from the bakery table. It thumped against his spine like an accusation. Footsteps echoed at the alley mouth. Nerio held his breath. A woman stepped in, her shadow long. She wore a cloak too fine for this district, but stained as if she'd slept in it. Her hair was pinned with a bone comb. Her eyes were sharp and tired. She looked Nerio up and down, then at the purple smear at his mouth. "You've tasted it," she said. Nerio's throat went dry. "Who are you?" "Kalia," she said. "Once I read birds for men who thought themselves gods. Now I read other things." Her gaze flicked to his sack. "And you've stolen the flower." "I didn't." Nerio started, then stopped. He had stolen it. In a city like this, survival was theft with a different name. Kalia stepped closer. She smelled faintly of smoke and bitter herbs. She held out her hand. "Give me a pinch." Nerio hesitated. Then he loosened the sack mouth and dipped 2 fingers in, pulled out a small mound of purple flour. Opalescent flecks glittered within. Kalia's expression tightened. She rubbed the flour between thumb and forefinger, then brought it to her nose. She inhaled once, shallow, and her pupils dilated slightly. "Ah," she said, voice soft. "They've gone that far." "What is it?" Nerio asked. He hated how desperate he sounded. Kalia glanced toward the alley mouth, where distant shouting still carried. "It's bread," she said, "and it's a net. They cast it over a starving city because nets are easier than compassion." Nerio bristled. "Who is they?" Kalia's mouth twitched, almost a smile. It held no warmth. "Who do you think? The Senate? The prefect? The men who have granaries and guards and priests who tell them their cruelty is order?" She pinched one of the opalescent flecks from the flour. It stuck to her fingertip like a tear that wouldn't fall. "This," she said, holding it up, "is what remains when a god dies." Nerio stared. "Gods don't die." Kalia's eyes met his. "In this city, everything dies, even what you worship." Nerio wanted to laugh at her madness. He wanted to believe her because it made the bread make sense in a way hunger never could. "What does it do?" he asked. Kalia brushed the fleck into a small ceramic bowl at her belt and tied the bowl closed like a precious thing. "It synchronizes," she said. "It makes many mouths one mouth, many dreams one dream. It gives a crowd a single thought and calls it peace." Nerio thought of the phrase, "We have always been seated," spoken by strangers in perfect cadence. A chill traced his spine. "Why?" he asked. Kalia's gaze drifted upward, as if she could see through the insulae to the forum. "Because famine is dangerous," she said. "Hunger makes people remember they have hands. It makes them notice what those hands could do to marble statues and soft officials. So the officials feed them something that makes them forget they are separate. A crowd that dreams together does not riot like a crowd that thinks." But they are rioting, Nerio said, voice breaking. They beat Varro. They... Kalia's face flickered with something like pity. It's not a riot, she said. Not yet. It's a procession in a mask. She leaned in. If they complete the synchronization, the city will move. Not metaphorically. The stones will obey the chant, and then you will see what your bread has been feeding. Nerio swallowed hard. How do you know this? Kalia reached into her cloak and drew out a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it enough to show a small object. A wax tablet, cracked and re-waxed, covered in scratched lines that did not look like Latin letters, more like tiny amphitheatres nested inside each other. This was part of my disgrace, she said. I read an omen the Senate did not want read. I told them the city had a second skeleton under it. They told me I had an imagination and an unhealthy interest in old myths. They took my office. They left me with my eyes. She wrapped the tablet again. Now I'm offering you something better than bread. What? Nerio asked, though he suspected. A choice, Kalia said. Help me cut the net before it tightens, or run home and wait for the city to swallow you in its dream. Nerio thought of his mother's thin ribs, Juna's small fist, Varro's shout swallowed by the coordinated roar. He looked down at the sack. The Senate seal stared up like an owl that had eaten too much. How? He asked. Kalia's smile returned, sharper now. We go below, she said, to where they grow the purple, to where they grind the bone. Nerio's mouth went dry again. They'll kill us. Kalia's eyes gleamed. Perhaps, she said, or perhaps they'll do worse. They'll make us agree. They moved through back streets, keeping to shadows. The district around the baths was always loud. Steam hissing, laughter spilling from doorways, the slap of wet sandals on stone. Today, the noise was wrong. It had an undercurrent, a rhythm. Snatches of the phrase floated between conversations like a shared itch. We have always been seated, someone muttered as they bargained for onions. We have always been seated, a child sang, skipping over a puddle that reflected a sky too dark for the hour. Nerio's skin crawled. At a crossroads near a shrine to Concordia, the street did something that made his stomach lurch. The paving stones seemed to tilt, not physically, but in his perception, as if the angle of the road shifted a fraction, and with it the direction of people's feet. Without realizing it, pedestrians altered their course, flowing toward the forum like water finding a drain. Do you see? Kalia whispered. Nerio nodded, throat tight. It's like the city is remembering, Kalia said. They reached a small door set into the side of a public bathhouse, half hidden behind a statue of a nymph whose face had been worn smooth by fingers and time. Kalia tapped twice, then once, then slid a coin under the door. It opened a finger width. A man's eye appeared, bloodshot. He sniffed the air. Kalia murmured something Nerio didn't catch. The eye blinked. The door opened wider. Inside, heat and steam wrapped them. The man who let them in was thin and hairless, his skin shiny with sweat. He stared at Nerio's purple-stained hands and smiled without humour. Another baker, he said. Good, you'll understand the smell. He led them past pools where bodies floated like pale fish, past a room where men scraped each other's skin with bronze strigils, past a curtained alcove where someone moaned in pleasure or pain. At the far end, behind the furnace, was a grate in the wall. Hot air blew through it. The grate's bars were thick and old, crusted with mineral. The hairless man lifted the grate with surprising strength. Behind it was darkness and a draught that smelled of damp earth and, faintly, incense and fungus. The Undercity, he said, and spat, the city's gut. Kalia slipped him another coin. If anyone asks, she said, we were never here. He laughed softly. In this city, no one is ever here, he said. We have always been seated. He closed the grate behind them. The passage beyond was cramped, brick walls slick with condensation. Nerio crouched as they moved, his shoulder brushing damp stone. The air cooled quickly, the bathhouse heat replaced by a subterranean chill that seeped into bone. After a turn, the passage widened. The floor dipped. Kalia produced a small oil lamp and lit it. The flame burned purple at the base before settling to yellow. Nerio stared. Even the oil, everything here has been touched, Kalia said. They descended into a space that opened like a throat. The catacombs were not the neat, orderly burial shelves Nerio had imagined from stories. This was older. The walls were not cut stone, but something that looked like ribbed limestone curved inward. Columns rose from the floor like vertebrae. Purple fungus grew in mats along the walls and ceiling, pulsing faintly with bioluminescent veins. It was beautiful in the way mould on a corpse could be beautiful, colourful, inevitable. Men in simple tunics moved among the growths, scraping fungus into baskets. Their faces were expressionless, their lips were purple. They worked in silence, except for a low chant that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Nerio strained his ears. The chant was not words, not exactly, more like a melody that pressed at the edges of thought. Kalia's hand closed on his wrist. "Don't listen too hard," she whispered. "It's a leash." They kept to the shadows of the columns. The workers did not look up. Perhaps they could not. Perhaps looking up required a self they no longer owned. Ahead, a corridor opened into a larger chamber filled with a mechanical sound, grinding, steady and patient, like a mill that never slept. They edged closer. The chamber was lit by lanterns hung from hooks embedded in the ribbed ceiling. The lantern light made the fungus gleam wetly. At the centre stood a machine, a large stone wheel turned by a crank, its surface carved with spirals and amphitheatre-like rings. Two men turned it, shoulders straining. At the wheel's edge, a pale object was pressed against it. Nerio's breath caught. It was bone, not a femur or skull, something longer, thicker, ridged, like a spine section, but too large for any human. Its surface shimmered with the same opalescent sheen as the flecks in the flour. As the wheel turned, it shaved off fine dust that fell into a trough below. Clerks collected the dust with careful scoops and poured it into sacks, already half filled with purple fungus flour. The clerks wore white tunics, clean even here. Wax tablets hung at their belts. Their mouths were purple to the lip line. One clerk dipped a finger into the dust, tasted it, then nodded and made a mark on his tablet. It was bureaucracy applied to divinity. Nerio's stomach rolled. He thought of Varro mixing dough, hands cracked and bleeding. He thought of his mother's ribs, all of them fed by a god's spine measured in spoonfuls. Kalia's eyes were bright in the lantern light. "There," she whispered. "The net's not." A voice spoke behind them. "You shouldn't be here." Nerio spun, heart leaping. A man stood at the chamber entrance, flanked by two lictors. He wore a dark cloak over a white tunic edged in purple. A signet ring gleamed on his finger. His face was round, well-fed, calm. Prefect Murren. He looked at them as if they were stray dogs that had wandered into a dining room. Kalia straightened, chin lifting. "Prefect," she said, voice like stone. "Still feeding the city its chains?" Murren's lips curved slightly. "Kalia," he said, as if greeting an acquaintance at a dinner. "I wondered how long before you crawled back to the underside. I hoped you'd learned discretion." He glanced at Nerio. "And you've brought me a baker. How efficient." Nerio's throat tightened. He wanted to run, but the lictors shifted subtly, rods ready. The walls seemed to hum louder. Murren stepped closer, eyes on Nerio's hands. "You've eaten," he said, "so you've seen a little. Enough to frighten you, not enough to understand." Nerio swallowed. "Why are you doing this?" Murren's expression softened, almost kindly. "Because hunger breaks empires," he said. "It breaks families. It breaks the very idea that we share a city. When everyone dreams their own dream, they fight to make it real. They tear down streets to build their own paths." He spread his hands toward the fungus farms, the workers, the spine mill. "This is Concord. This is one dream, one path. The people eat, and for a few hours they are not wolves. They are a chorus." Kalia's laugh was sharp. "A chorus singing your script?" Murren's gaze flicked to her, irritation briefly visible. "You always mistake control for cruelty," he said. "If the Senate wanted cruelty, we would let famine do its work and rebuild on the bones. This is mercy." Nerio stared at the spine being shaved down. "Mercy?" he rasped. Murren followed his gaze and shrugged. "Old bones," he said. "Older than any of us. It died before this city was even stone. It left behind potential, a residue of agreement." He looked back at Nerio. "Would you rather the people eat nothing? Would you rather your mother die for your principles?" Nerio flinched. The prefect's words landed like a hook behind his ribs. His mother's face flashed in his mind, eyes closed, mouth open, breathing thin. Murren stepped closer. His voice lowered. "You are a baker," he said. "You understand what it means to take raw things and make them into something that holds a city together. You have skill. You have value." He glanced at Kalia. "Unlike some," he added, then turned back to Nerio. "Come above. Work under my protection. Bake for the Annona. Your family will be fed. You will be safe. You will not have to run through alleys with stolen sacks." Nerio's mouth tasted of purple bread and shame. Kalia's hand tightened on his wrist. "He's offering you a leash with velvet," she hissed. Murren's eyes narrowed. "And you," he said to Kalia, "are offering him martyrdom dressed as freedom." Kalia stepped forward. "You're not preventing riots," she said. "You're channeling them. You're building a procession to something under the Forum. You're feeding a city its own older shape until it remembers what it was built on." Murren's calm faltered for the first time. For a heartbeat, his eyes looked tired. "You don't understand what's beneath," he said quietly. "I do. I've seen it. The Senate has seen it. That's why we feed. That's why we chant. Because if the city remembers wrong, if it remembers hunger without concord, then it doesn't just riot." He looked toward the ribbed columns as if expecting them to move. "It opens." Nerio's skin prickled. "Opens to what?" Murren did not answer. He lifted a hand. The lictors stepped forward. "Take the auger," Murren said. "She's a persistent infection." Kalia's eyes flashed. "Run!" she hissed at Nerio and shoved him hard. Nerio stumbled backward, nearly falling. He saw Kalia twist, her cloak flaring. She threw something, her cracked wax tablet, toward the lanterns. It struck a hook and knocked a lantern loose. Oil spilled, flame-catching fungus with a hungry purple flare. The hum became a howl. Workers looked up for the first time, faces blank, then terrified as the synchronized chant broke into dissonant cries. The fungus pulsed faster, light strobing. Nerio ran. He dodged between a column and a stack of sacks. Behind him, a lictor's rod cracked against stone. Someone shouted his name. Kalia? Varro? He couldn't tell. The air was full of smoke and fungus spores that glittered like dust motes caught in sunlight. He reached the corridor they'd come through, but the passage looked wrong. The brick walls had become ribbed limestone. The floor angled slightly upward, as if leading him somewhere else. "The city is moving," Kalia had said. Nerio forced himself forward anyway. He climbed, half-crawled, lungs burning. The purple light behind him faded as he gained distance, replaced by darkness and his own ragged breath. He emerged into the furnace room behind the bathhouse grate. Heat slammed him. He stumbled, nearly colliding with a naked man carrying towels, who stared at Nerio's soot-smeared face and purple hands, and backed away as if from a ghost. Nerio pushed past and fled into the street. Outside, the city had changed. It was subtle at first. A statue's shadow lay at an angle it shouldn't. A familiar alley ended in a wall where there had always been a turn. People moved with purpose in one direction, not the chaotic purpose of a riot, but the steady pull of a tide, toward the Forum. They walked with purple mouths and dark eyes, murmuring the phrase like a prayer that had become a habit. "We have always been seated." Nerio stumbled into a doorway and watched as a woman carried her crying infant toward the Forum without looking down at it, as if the child were an extra limb. A group of young men marched, arms linked, smiling faintly. An old man limped along, tears streaming down his face, still smiling. It was horror without shouting. It was consent without understanding. Nerio's mind raced. Kalia was below, captured or dead. The prefect would tighten his net. Tomorrow's distribution would feed the synchronized dream deeper, lock it in. He clutched the stolen flour sack to his chest. The Senate seal had cracked during his run. Purple dust leaked onto his tunic, staining it like a wound. He thought of Varro falling under rods. He thought of his mother's ribs. He thought of Kalia saying, "They'll do worse. They'll make us agree." He turned and ran toward the bakery. The streets tried to redirect him. Twice he found himself on a road that slanted toward the Forum without him choosing it. Twice he stopped, blinked hard, forced his feet into side alleys. Each time it felt like pushing against a current that wanted him elsewhere. By the time he reached the bakery, the front door hung crooked. The stall was smashed. Purple loaves lay in the gutter, trampled into paste. Inside, the ovens were cold. Varro lay on the floor near the work table, eyes open but unfocused. His shoulder was bruised black. His breathing was shallow. Nerio dropped to his knees. "Master," he whispered. Varro's eyes flicked, focused briefly. He recognized Nerio and tried to speak. Only a rasp came out, stained purple. Nerio's throat tightened. "Don't," he whispered, though he didn't know what he meant. "Don't speak the phrase. Don't die. Don't leave him alone with a sack of godbone and a city that wanted to sit together and swallow itself." Varro's hand twitched toward the flour sack. His fingers brushed the Senate seal, then curled away as if burned. "They're coming," Varro rasped. As if summoned, footsteps sounded outside, heavy, official. Nerio looked toward the back where his mother and sister slept. He heard nothing from them. The fear that surged through him was a physical thing. He dragged Varro's body slightly behind the work table, then grabbed the flour sack and stumbled into the back room. His mother lay as before, still breathing. Juna slept, thumb in her mouth. Nerio crouched and pressed his forehead to Juna's hair for a heartbeat, then stood and moved to the pantry shelf. Varro's bakery had one treasure left. The old starter jar, clay sealed with wax kept for years. It was the mother of their bread, sour and alive, fed even when flour was scarce. It smelled like vinegar and apples and stubbornness. Nerio took it down. His hands shook so badly the wax seal cracked. Footsteps at the front. A voice. "By authority of the prefect." Nerio didn't have time. He dumped a scoop of the purple flour into the mixing bowl. He added water, salt. He hesitated, then scraped a handful of ash from the cold oven floor, fine grey powder that smelled of burnt crusts and old heat. He remembered Kalia's words, a leash with velvet. He needed something that would cut velvet. He pricked his thumb with the bread knife. Blood welled bright and dark. He let it drip into the bowl. Not much. A baker's tithe. Then he scooped a chunk of the old starter, pale, sticky, alive, and folded it into the purple mix. The dough shuddered under his hands. For a moment the hum in the air rose, angry. The purple flour resisted, tightening like a fist. Nerio pressed harder, kneading with a fury that surprised him. He thought of Varro's cracked hands. He thought of the spine being shaved down by clerks who had never been hungry. He kneaded until the dough stopped fighting and began to yield, not in submission, but in acceptance of a new shape. At the front the door crashed open, boots on flour-dusted tiles. A lictor's rod struck the counter. Nerio worked faster, shaping loaves small enough to bake quickly, because time was a luxury the Senate never allowed the poor. He shoved them into the oven, stoked the coals, coaxed flame. The oven heat returned like breath to lungs. "Search," someone barked. Nerio wiped his hands on his apron, leaving purple smears like bruises, and stepped out into the main room. Two lictors stood near the smashed stall, rods in hand. Between them was a clerk in a white tunic. His mouth was purple. His eyes slid over Nerio's stained hands and lingered. "You," the clerk said. "Apprentice." Nerio held his gaze. "The bakery was looted," he said. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "If you're here to collect taxes, you're late." The clerk's lips twitched. "We're here to ensure the people receive proper bread," he said, reciting. "Sabotage is treason. Treason is hunger." Nerio's stomach clenched, the phrase the same cadence. "And Varro?" one lictor asked, glancing around. "The master?" "Gone to the physician," Nerio lied. "Broken shoulder." The clerk stepped closer, sniffing the air. His nostrils flared. "What are you baking?" he asked softly. "Bread," Nerio said. "What else?" The clerk's gaze flicked toward the oven where heat shimmered. "That is not the Anona's recipe." Nerio forced a shrug. "I bake what I can with what I have. If the prefect wants to arrest someone for hunger, he'll have to arrest the whole city." The clerk stared at him a long moment. In his eyes, Nerio saw something like curiosity, like the edge of a self that had not been fully netted. Then the clerk's mouth opened and the phrase came out unbidden like a cough. "We have always been seated," he whispered. His eyes widened as if he hadn't meant to say it. He blinked hard. For a heartbeat his face looked afraid. Then the lictor beside him clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Enough," the lictor said. "We have orders." The clerk's fear smoothed into blankness again. He nodded. "Bring the remaining sacks," he said. "The prefect needs all flour accounted for. Tomorrow's distribution will be larger. Tomorrow—" Nerio's hands itched. He thought of the loaves rising in the oven, altered. Ash. Blood. Old starter. A refusal folded into the net. He made his decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He reached under the work table and grabbed the flour sack, now mostly empty. He held it up. "This is all," he said. "The rest was stolen in the riot." The clerk frowned. "Open it." Nerio did. Purple dust puffed out. Opalescent flecks glittered. The clerk's eyes fixed on the flecks. His pupils dilated slightly. The hum in the room grew. The lictors leaned in without understanding why. Nerio moved. He swung the sack hard, snapping it like a whip. Purple dust exploded into the air, a cloud of fungus and godbone that filled the room. The lictors coughed, stumbling back. The clerk inhaled sharply, eyes rolling. For an instant Nerio saw the overlay, Roma behind, wet stone and ribbed arches, a shadow of an amphitheatre where the bakery had been. The clerk cried out, a sound like a sob and a laugh at once. Nerio darted past them through the front door and ran. He ran not away but toward the forum. The city flowed around him, bodies moving in a slow, unstoppable current. The streets angled and shifted, trying to guide him. He let them. He followed the pull because if he was going to cut the net, he had to do it where it was knotted at the distribution. By the time he reached the forum, the square was already crowded. People packed shoulder to shoulder, mouths purple, eyes dark, murmuring their shared phrase like bees around a hive. Clerks stood on a raised platform with sacks of flour and baskets of loaves. Lictors formed a ring, rods held across their chests like bars of a cage. Above, the Senate steps loomed, marble clean as denial. Statues stared with blank stone eyes. Prefect Murren stood at the platform's edge, cloak draped perfectly. His face was calm again. He lifted his hands. "Citizens," he called, voice carrying, "receive your portion, receive concord. Disorder is hunger." "Hunger is disorder," the crowd responded in 1,000 voices that sounded like one. Nerio's skin prickled. The synchronization was deep. The chant was a machine and the people its gears. He pushed through the crowd, elbows and shoulders sliding past bodies that did not resist so much as absorb him. Purple mouths turned toward him. Some smiled faintly. "We have always been seated," a woman whispered as he passed, eyes shining with tears. Nerio reached the front near the platform. A clerk saw him and frowned. "You—" Nerio didn't wait. He reached into the cloth bundle he carried and pulled out the loaves he'd baked. Small, dark, their crusts dusted with ash. The smell was different from the Annona bread. Less incense, more smoke and sourness, like real bread from a world that still had wheat. He threw the first loaf onto the platform. It hit with a dull thud. Murren's gaze snapped to it, irritation flickering. "What is this?" he demanded. Nerio's voice rose, surprising him with its strength. "Bread," he shouted, "not yours." Lictors surged forward, rods lifted. But the crowd stirred. Heads tilted, nostrils flared. The altered bread scent cut through the incense like a knife. Nerio threw another loaf, and another. They rolled among the Annona loaves like dark stones among bruised fruit. A child at the front reached up, grabbed one and bit it before anyone could stop him. For a heartbeat the forum went quiet. The child's pupils dilated, then constricted sharply. He blinked. His face twisted, not into the dreamy smile of the purple bread, but into confusion, then recognition, as if he'd just remembered his own name. He looked up at the Senate steps and screamed, not in fear, in fury. The scream was contagious. The crowd's chant faltered. Voices stumbled over the familiar phrases as if the words had turned to ash on their tongues. "We have always," someone began, then choked, eyes widening. "No," they whispered. "No, I haven't." Another person bit Nerio's bread and laughed, a raw, startled laugh. "I can hear myself," she said, sobbing. "I can hear myself." The overlay began. Roma behind slid over the forum like a skin being pulled back. Marble steps became ribbed stone. Statues' faces softened into pale masks with seams. The Senate building's columns pulsed faintly, as if they were throats swallowing. Murren's calm shattered. He stepped back, eyes darting. "Stop!" he snapped at his clerks. Do not eat that." But it was too late. People were grabbing the ash-dusted loaves, tearing them, sharing them with greedy hands. The altered bread spread through the crowd faster than official distribution ever could. The synchronization did not vanish. It changed. Instead of one dream imposed, it became a shared lucidity, many minds looking at the same thing, and agreeing not because they were netted, but because it was undeniable. They saw the Senate steps as a mouth. They saw the clerks' purple mouths moving without their consent. They saw, above the prefect's head, the faint outline of an amphitheatre without sky, seats made of ribs, waiting. "Sir, we have always been seated," Murren tried to say, as if clinging to the phrase would anchor reality. But his voice cracked. The words came out wrong. The crowd turned toward him as one body, not chanting now, but breathing together in a way that felt like a decision. A man stepped forward, one Nerio recognized as the one who had grabbed his wrist at the stall. His eyes were clear now, not black. His mouth was still purple, but the purple looked like a bruise, not a blessing. "You fed us a god," the man said, voice steady, "and called it peace." A woman beside him lifted her infant and looked down at it as if seeing it for the first time in days. Tears slid down her cheeks. "I forgot you," she whispered, horrified. Then she looked up at Murren. "You made me forget." Murren raised his hands, backing away. "This is necessary," he said. "This is—" "Necessary," the crowd echoed, but not as obedience, as accusation. The Senate doors behind him opened. For an instant, Nerio thought men would pour out, senators in white, guards with swords. Instead, a procession emerged that did not walk so much as glide. Senators, yes, but their faces were not faces. Each wore a pale mask, smooth and oval, seamed down the centre. The masks turned toward the crowd in perfect unison. The hum in the air became a roar. The city's stones vibrated. Nerio felt his knees weaken. Roma behind was here fully now. The forum's paving stones were slick with rain that was not falling. The amphitheatre silhouette above them sharpened, ribs curving, seats waiting. The masked senators spoke, and their voices were not separate. They were a chorus layered over itself. "Be seated," they said. The crowd did not move. For a heartbeat, the entire city held its breath. Then someone, Nerio never knew who, laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has been told a lie for so long that the truth feels obscene. "We are standing," the voice said. Another voice joined. "We are hungry." Another. "We remember." The words were not synchronized in cadence, but they were synchronized in meaning. A new concord, messy and human. The amphitheatre above shuddered, as if confused by a chorus that did not follow its script. Murren's face twisted. "You'll open it," he hissed at Nerio, eyes wild now. "Do you understand? If the city remembers wrong, it opens and eats." "Then let it choke," Kalia's voice cut through the noise. Nerio whipped his head around. Kalia stood on the edge of the platform, cloak torn, hair loose. Blood streaked one temple. A lictor's rod lay broken at her feet. Her eyes were bright with the same fierce clarity as the crowd's. "You wanted a chorus," she shouted at the masked senators. "Here it is. Not yours." The masked senators' heads tilted in unison, as if listening to a sound beneath her words. The city made its choice. The paving stones around the Senate steps shifted. Not subtly now. They slid like scales on a living thing. The marble steps elongated, curving inward. The Senate building's mouth widened. The masked procession tried to retreat. Their smooth faces turned, but the doorway behind them was no longer a doorway. It was a ribbed stone closing like a throat. One senator reached out with a pale hand, and the seam in his mask split, opening slightly. Something pale and soft wriggled inside. The crowd recoiled, then surged forward, not to help, not to kill, but to witness, to see what had been hidden, to refuse ignorance. Murren shouted and tried to push through the lictors. A rod swung, someone screamed. The old mechanism of control attempted to reassert itself, but the lictors hesitated. Their mouths were purple too. One lowered his rod, eyes wide. "Prefect," he whispered, voice trembling. "I can hear myself." Murren stared at him as if he were a traitor. "Hold the line!" The lictor's hand shook. "I don't want to," he said, and the simplicity of it hit Nerio like a blow. The Senate mouth closed, not with a slam, but with a slow, inevitable swallowing motion. Ribbed stones sealed. The masked senators vanished into Roma behind, as if the city had decided to keep its own parasites. A deep sound rolled through the forum, half sigh, half burp, half the settling of old masonry. The amphitheatre silhouette above dimmed, then faded like an afterimage. Rain that was not falling stopped. The paving stones dried. People stood in stunned silence, purple mouths open, staring at where the Senate doors had been. Then someone began to cry. Others joined. Some in relief, some in grief, some in rage with nowhere to go now that the target had been swallowed by stone. Nerio looked at his hands, purple-stained, ash-smudged. Still his. Kalia stepped down from the platform and came to him. She swayed slightly, exhaustion catching up. "You redirected it," she said, voice hoarse. I didn't know if it would work," Nerio said. His voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Kalia's mouth twitched. "Neither did I," she admitted. "That's the difference between prophecy and baking. You can't see the loaf until it rises." Around them, the crowd began to move again, but differently now. Not as a tide pulled by an imposed map. Individuals peeled away, turned toward their own streets, their own homes, as if remembering they had choices. A man approached Nerio holding half-eaten ash loaf. His eyes were clear, his mouth purple. "What happens now?" the man asked. Nerio looked toward the Senate building, now a plain facade of marble again, door sealed, silent. He looked at the granary platform where clerks stood frozen, tablets dangling uselessly. "I don't know," Nerio said honestly. The man nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "I was tired of knowing what to say." By the time Nerio returned to the bakery, the sun was higher, pale and flat. The streets had stopped shifting. They felt solid underfoot, as if the city had decided to behave like stone again. Varro was still alive. Nerio found him where he'd left him, breathing shallow. When Varro's eyes opened and focused on Nerio, they did not glaze with the chant. They stayed his. "You're late," Varro rasped, and it was so ordinary Nerio almost laughed. Nerio knelt beside him. "The ovens are hot," he said. "I baked." Varro's gaze flicked to Nerio's purple mouth, then to his ash-smudged apron. He swallowed painfully. "Was it good bread?" Nerio thought of the forum. The Senate swallowed. The crowd's messy concord. The cost that would linger in every purple-stained lip. "It was real," Nerio said. Varro closed his eyes as if that answer was enough. In the back room, his mother still slept. Juna stirred, woke, and blinked at him. Her eyes were clear, but her lips, faintly, had a purple tint, like a bruise from biting too hard in her sleep. "Mama's hungry," she whispered. Nerio's throat tightened. He reached for her hand. "I know," he said. "I'm making bread." He went to the work table. The old starter jar sat open, its sour smell filling the room like a memory of better days. The purple flour sack lay crumpled in the corner, nearly empty. Nerio mixed what he could. Plain flour scavenged from Varro's hidden cache, a pinch of purple, more ash than before. He worked the dough slowly, deliberately, feeling it yield under his hands. Outside, the city murmured. Not one phrase now, but many voices, arguments, laughter, cries, life unsynchronized. When Nerio slid the loaves into the oven, the flame flickered purple at the base, then settled to honest orange. He watched through the oven mouth as the dough rose. For a moment he thought he saw the faint outline of an amphitheatre in the crackle of heat, seats made of ribs, waiting. He blinked, and it was only fire. He did not know if the Senate would stay swallowed. He did not know what would crawl out of the city's older bones next. He only knew that the purple stain would not wash off easily, not from his hands, not from the mouths of those who had tasted concord. The city had been fed a god, and had decided briefly to wake. Nerio listened to the bread's quiet crackle as it baked and thought, "We have always been standing.